Are you sick and tired of playing that sticky, sloppy neck? Does your guitar's glossy neck finish put you on a slippery slope to Shitsville?
I hate it! Well, good news, kids, because Uncle Ben is here to help keep your neck in check. I'm Ben Eller, and this is why you suck at guitar. Hello, children, and welcome to a brand new installment of This Is Why You Suck at Guitar. Here's your good pal, Uncle Ben. On this week's very special episode of Blossom, we're going to take a break from educating you in the ways of how to become the next shred-eye knight on your block to learn a little bit about a simple trick that you can do to modify the neck of your guitar into a total speed machine. I think the first time that I ever played on a guitar with an oil and waxed finish neck was an old Ernie Ball Music Band Eddie Van Halen guitar that my buddy Brad had, and I was instantly in love. It wasn't long after that I started trying to figure out how I could replicate the feel of that finish on my own guitars at home. Initially, I started off with some 4/0 steel wool going over the necks of my guitars, and that felt okay. It made them a little bit satiny. And then after that, I experimented around with taking all the finish off of the neck and coating it with tung oil, which worked okay, but it wasn't until I found the techniques I'm going to show you guys today that I really struck gold. But first, let's meet our lucky test subjects. This is one from Uncle Ben's personal collection. It's the guitar that you saw on the Weekend Wing Shop video called Ben's New Baby. It's a 1987 Ibanez RG550. That's a very first year model. I really love this guitar. And I've started refinishing it here in my brand new finish that I call Fallout, which is made of silver and copper leaf, and it's absolutely ridiculously gorgeous. I really wish that you could see this thing in person. It's amazing. Anyway, these necks came from the factory with a little bit of a gloss finish. You can see it kind of shining there in the background. It's not ridiculously, sticky and shitty feeling, but it's just a little bit too glossy for my taste. So we're going to take this guy, give him a good oil and wax finish, just like I do on all of my guitars. Exhibit B is this old Jackson Fusion guitar that belongs to my buddy Jeremy, which I've also refinished in my sick new Fallout finish. Isn't it lovely? Part of the reason I'm doing this guitar in this video is to show you how you can deal with binding on the neck. You can see how this guy has some binding all down the board, covers up the fret tangs and stuff. So I'm going to show you how to do a natural finish on a neck like this too, just in case your guitar has some sexy binding like this one does. But first things first, let's take a look at the supplies you're going to need to gather before you can take this project on yourself. You're going to need some tape. I really enjoy this good old frog tape right here. It's really good stuff. Leaves a good clean line. Doesn't really leave any goop behind. It's what you want. You're gonna need some sandpaper, kid. A couple of different kinds. I like to start removing the finish of a neck with about 220 grit, which is what we got right here, wrapped around a sanding sponge. These things are great because that's just kind of a dense sponge, and you can wrap sandpaper around the outside of it, which will keep kind of conforming to the shape of the neck without actually letting you sand a hole through it or sand in one spot too much, which is good. And then later on you can use a fine one like this 320 grit to continue sanding out the neck. Now, it's up to you how fine you want to go. Myself, whenever I'm doing one of these necks, I'll get 220 grit, I'll get a 320 sponge, and every now and then I'll get 400 grit if I want to get pretty frisky on it. Basically, the finer grits of sandpaper that you use, the more slick and glassy the back of the neck is going to be. But myself, very much like Old Dirty Bastard, I like it raw. So I usually only go to about 320 grit myself, but your mileage may vary. You're going to need some 4/0 steel wool, kids. When I say 4/0, I mean 0000 grade is what it says on the package. This is the finest steel wool that they make. This is really one of the secret steps to making your neck play like buttered sex. And the last thing you're going to need here is the real star of the show, which is a couple of products from Birchwood Casey, makers of fine gunstock finishes for redneck pieces of shit all over the South. This stuff is totally awesome though, absolutely my favorite guitar neck finish in the world. You're going to need to get yourself a bottle of tru-oil. One of these big bottles is seriously enough to do like Joe Bonamassa' entire collection of guitars. You don't really need much. They sell it in these small containers like this too. That will be more than enough to probably do every guitar that you own 5 times over. But anyway, I got the big one. just because. So get yourself a bottle of tru-oil. That's going to be the main kind of protectant and finish of the neck here. And also get yourself a bottle of the Gunstock wax. You're also going to need yourself just a good old clean cotton rag to apply these things with. You could use paper towel too, I guess, but I like to use an old cut up t-shirt or something like that. So go ahead, go to your closet and find that disturbed shirt that you've been wearing for years. Cut that shit up. You should be ashamed of wearing that in public anyway, and use it to refinish the neck of your favorite guitar. Now before we get started, I'd like to take a minute to tell you that I am in no way, shape, or form responsible for you fucking up your guitar. If you try this finish and you dig in way too hard with the sandpaper and you start sanding through and poking through and seeing your truss rod, totally not my fault. I'm gonna show you what I do, and if you follow my steps, it should be okay. But if you screw something up or like chew up the sides of your frets or your fretboard or something like that, I'm completely not responsible for that. I'm just some jackass on the internet, so don't take it out on me if this project does not go according to plan. But that being said, I'll also tell you that I've never had a single problem ever out of any of my guitars, and I've been doing this stuff for years. Now what I'm showing you here today are both bolt-on neck guitars, which means that we can unscrew them from the body of the guitar and use that to get a good even finish all the way across the entire thing. Now the first time that I did this, I actually didn't take the neck off of the guitar. I left it on and I very carefully taped around the neck joint and the interior of the horns and stuff like that too. I'll show you how to do that as well. But you'll get a better finish if you just go ahead and take the neck off. So if you want to do this up proper, the first things first you're going to do here is to remove the neck off of your bolt-on neck guitar, whether that be an RG or a Strat or whatever. And you'll also want to loosen the truss rod up here. Your Strat might have it back here on the heel end. If you're playing something like I am, it's up here at the top end. Loosen that truss rod. If you're unsure how to do that, you probably shouldn't be doing this operation unsupervised. Seek the help of an adult or a guitar tech to tell you about how to loosen your truss rod, but helpful hint, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. You don't want that truss rod exerting tension on strings that aren't there anymore. That's how you end up with a neck that puckers forward like this. So again, just loosen that truss rod up a little bit after you take your neck off of the body of your guitar. Step one. If you've got a precious guitar like this Ibanez RG3120 here that you're too scared to take the neck off of the body, but you still want to refinish your neck like a boss, you're going to need to tape up around the interior of the horns and the side of the neck joint and stuff like this. Basically just put a good protective layer of tape all around anywhere right here where sandpaper might accidentally scrape up the body or anything like that. You don't want to be scraping up a beautiful finish like this elegant twilight blue here. Painter's tape. Blue painter's tape is the best for that because it's not going to leave a bunch of goop on the finish of your guitar. If all you have is like frog tape or masking tape or anything like that, what I recommend doing is getting a piece of it, that you're going to put on the body. And if you're worried that it's too sticky, what you can do is to take it and just de-stick it, like on your shirt, Just basically give it a little on-off action. That'll take some of the stickiness off of the tape. That way it's not going to leave any behind on your finish. And again, basically what you would want to do is to go over the entire neck joint and stuff like this and just put on a layer of tape just like that all around anywhere that your sanding motion might accidentally hit the body. So if you're going to do this without taking the neck off of the guitar, put it all along the backside, all inside of the horns, on both sides and so forth. That way you won't scratch up the finish on your sick rig. Isn't it glorious? Now the first thing that you're going to want to do here, whether you've left the neck on your guitar or off, is to tape up the side of the fretboard at least down to the fret tangs. The fret tangs are these little pieces of metal that are embedded into the fretboard of the guitar. You're going to want to take a piece of tape and basically tape up the entire side of the fretboard and cover up those fret tangs. So here's that same neck, this time with a layer of tape covering up those fret tangs. Notice I didn't cover up the entire fretboard per se, just kind of cut it right there along the edge of where those fret tangs are. Now as for the remaining, like basically, I don't know what that'd be, about 1 millimeter or 2 of fretboard that we're actually not going to completely sand down to the bare wood because of those fret tangs, don't really worry about that. There at the end we'll go over it with 4/0 steel wool. It'll buff it to a good satiny finish that you'll really never notice that last, like I said, 1 millimeter or 2 of board that you didn't refinish. Yeah, you won't really notice anyway, so don't worry about that. Cover up those fret tangs. Now, as for this lovely Action Jackson, on the other hand, which does have complete binding, including covered fret ends and everything, what I'd recommend doing is taping up that entire thing. And again, any kind of sheen that's left on it, see how it's shiny right now? That'll be taken care of at the very end with some good old 4/0 steel wool. You'll never know the difference, don't worry about it. So now that you've got your fretboard and or body all taped up and protected, that way you won't screw it up, it's time to get to removing the finish here on the back of the neck. Go the hell outside to do this stuff. Do not do it indoors in your home. You do not want to be breathing this stuff in ever. Now that you have your fretboard all taped up and we're standing outside on the deck, we are ready to commence. Here in my right arm hand, I'm holding on to that 320 grit sanding sponge we talked about earlier, and in my left arm hand, I'm holding a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. The advantage of using a flexible soft block like this is that it'll conform to the shape of the neck a little bit. You won't want to use a hard block, like a hard rubber block, that's just a straight flat edge, because your neck isn't a straight flat edge, so sanding across that with a flat block isn't a good idea. What you're going to do is to take that piece of sandpaper, listen to the cicadas that are really loud, and wrap it around just like that. I'm holding it tight. I've got my fingers on this side, I've got my hand thumb on this side holding the paper on over there. I've chosen for my work surface to be this black metal deck table. Whatever your work surface of choice is, I recommend that you take a manky old towel and lay it across it to protect the fretboard of your guitar. You're going to be laying it face down, you're going to be grinding on it with that sandpaper. You don't want to be grinding your frets up against this black metal deck table. I like to apply my manky old towel with a flourish. And now we commence the sanding ritual. Hold your sanding block in your hand here, grab onto the neck with your other hand, and what I want you to do is just to make long, even movements, sanding with the direction of the grain. Meaning not like this, not in circles, just going in long, straight lines like this with the grain of the wood. That's going to get you the smoothest sand possible. Now, as you're doing this, you don't need to be mashing down on the sanding block. The sandpaper will do the work for you. That's some of the best advice I've ever heard. Let the sandpaper do the work for you. You don't really need to be mashing on it or anything like that. Be sure not to stay in one spot for too long either. You don't want to just sand away the finish on the back of the neck. You got to flip it over here to the sides, work it over there for a little bit. Oh baby, work that other side a little bit. It's like making love. Every now and then as you're sanding, you'll notice that you're not really sanding as much as you were sanding just a minute ago. And that's because your piece of paper has become loaded up with all that finish that you've been removing. Whenever that happens, you don't have to get a new piece of paper or anything like that. What you need to do is just to basically knock some of that shit out of it like that. Just basically hit it up against whatever you've got available. It'll knock some of that dust out. Be sure to keep your eyes, nose, and face away from it while you do this. Again, you don't want to be breathing this stuff in directly. So knock all the dust loose, commence sanding. Continue ad nauseum. All of that finish that you're removing that's building up on the neck like that is only slowing your paper down too. So be sure every now and then to take your manky towel, wipe off your surface, clear all that dust off of it. That way you can continue sanding impediment free. Now you can see already I've just been sanding for a few minutes. We can see where some areas of the neck are getting a little bit more exposed to the wood grain. Meanwhile, other areas are still shiny and slick, like that right there. It's giving you a good idea of how even your coverage is. Again, be sure to move that sandpaper around a pretty good amount while you're doing this. You don't want to just sand off one spot on the neck. And basically, you're just going to be doing this for a while. What? So here in my arm hand, I've got a very, 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 very slightly damp paper towel. I basically just wet one part of it, folded it up and mashed it together so it's just barely damp. Not a lot of water at all. Now what I'm going to do to test it, see how far into the finish I've gone and what areas I've hit and what areas I've not, is I'm going to rub that on the back of the neck. And what we're going to see are very defined areas where you can see natural wood and other areas where you can still tell it's dark and glossy, meaning I still have finish in that area. check it out. So with the wood wet like this, I can tell, again, this area is being eaten through pretty well. You can see it's lighter colored. You see the wood grain a little bit more. These areas that are still a little bit more amber are the ones where the finish is still on there pretty heavily. So again, that's giving me a good view of where I need to continue sanding. Now, another thing that you can check for as well is whenever the wood is raw, after you get it very slightly damp like that, you'll be able to run your finger across it and feels like 12 o'clock stubble, you know? It's just a little whiskery. That'll let you know you're getting down to the bare wood. The finished surface, the areas where you still have polyurethane on there, they won't do that. They'll just feel wet. But the areas that are raw will feel kind of whiskery. Now this is another cool trick too. This is one that my grandpa Cecil taught me long ago. He was a woodworker by trade. Taught me a lot of tricks about working with some woods and stuff. This is a technique woodworkers use called whiskering the wood. What we're doing here is whenever we have a raw wood surface, if you get it slightly damp, it'll raise up those end fibers of those pieces of wood. And basically, if you sand those down, you're left with a surface that's even smoother than what it was before you wet it. So if you want the ultimate super glassy finish on this, you can whisker that wood 4 or 5 times over and sand down those whiskers every time, and you'll get it extremely smooth. Again, I don't want it totally glassy, so I only do it maybe 2 times. But if you want it really fine, just keep on whiskering that bad boy. Now, as you're sanding, if you start to wear away your tape, halt all progress and re-tape. Again, we don't want to start eating into those fret tangs at all. Actually, I can see a little bit right there where my tape has moved away. So I've got to take a break, re-tape that, move that tape back over so that fret tangs are covered up before I can continue my merry work. So after you've sanded the entire neck down with that 220 grit and you've got it down to the raw wood, continue all the same steps that you just did, but using your 320 grit sanding sponge. It's a little bit finer, so it's going to get the wood a little bit smoother. I'll go over the entire neck with that. Again, repeating the same processes, making sure I'm not staying in one spot too long, making sure the edges of my fretboard are taped off, cleaning my block every now and then, cleaning the neck off every now and then, yada yada yada. Continuing on until I've sanded the entire neck very smooth with this. Now, since you've already removed the finish off of the back of the neck with the 220, this process won't take nearly as long. Again, we're not stripping anything off now. We're just cleaning up the work that we already did. You're making it smoother. Myself, I stop after 320. I usually don't continue on to 400 and 500, 600 grit. Because again, every higher grit you're going to be making the finished product slicker and glassier. I like mine to have that Ernie Ball Music Man kind of raw maple sort of feel. So if you go down to about 320 and whisker it a few times, hit it with the 320 again, that's about what you'll need if you want it to feel just like Uncle Ben's. But like I said, if you want yours to be slicker, repeat all this process again with 400 grit, repeat it again with 500, repeat it again with 600 or so. I've gone up to 800 before, and I ended up with something that basically sort of felt like a lightly glossy neck, which again, isn't really my cup of tea. But if you want something glossy, keep sanding finer and finer grits. It'll make the end product smoother and smoother. But myself, I stop at 320. So after a bunch of sanding, I've got the entire plain surface of this neck down to the raw wood. And I can check that I've gotten it all down to the wood by taking that slightly damp paper towel, running it across the entire thing, and the grain will raise up entirely and feel very whispery, just like your sister's leg stubble. That was such a fun prom. So now it's time to get greasy and start putting down the first couple of finish coats of tru-oil on this neck. Let's check it out. So now the fun part starts and we get to start applying some finish to the back of our neck. Lay down some newspaper or your old towel from earlier, something like that here on the kitchen table. Grab your Birchwood KC tru-oil, except no substitutes, and your old cut up piece of t-shirt here, and let's get started on the fun. So what you're going to do is take your rag and just very lightly put a teeny tiny bit of that tru-oil on there. You don't need a ton, a little dab will do you. What we're looking to do here is apply several thin coats, and that'll give us a good finish. Not one big, thick, heavy coat. Don't do that. It'll take forever to dry, and when it does, it'll dry kind of gummy if you use a really heavy coat. So again, several thin coats and some time is what you need right here. So you got just a little bit of that on your rag. All you're going to do is apply it, just going with the finish of the grain, just like that. Going with the grain, I should say. But yeah, just long strokes going with the grain of the wood, just like that. Looks like I might need just a little bit more. So again, I'll just take just a drop and apply it to the neck here in long strokes. Now as you do this, you'll start to see some really nice finish, some really nice figuring popping out of the wood as you do this. I'm not good at talking and doing things. I'm noticing even some little kind of bird's eye spots here that I never noticed before. I love this tru-oil stuff. It really brings out all the best parts of the grain in the wood, as well as giving us an awesome finish. So now what you're going to do is just leave it and wait for that coat to completely dry, and that's basically it. So it'll probably take, well, depending on how big the coat was, maybe give it an hour, maybe 2 hours, something like that. Just make sure that it's not tacky and sticky to the touch anymore, and that's how you'll know that it's dry and ready for another coat. You want to do more than one coat with this stuff. You want it to penetrate the wood and form a good protective barrier from your sweat and your acids and all that kind of stuff. I recommend at least 3 coats, but I know some guys that go up to 10 and 11 and 12. I usually do about 3 to 5, something like that, and that's enough to form a good finish on the back of the neck that'll last a long time and feel fantastic. So again, right now all you need to do is just crack open a beer and wait. So I've waited here a while, and this coat is no longer tacky to the touch, so I'm going to go ahead and apply the second coat. Just the same thing that we did before. One thin coat at a time is all that you need to do. So I'll give this some time to dry, and then I'll apply another coat. Again, just keep building and building. The great thing about tru-oil here is that it melts into the previous coat, a lot like how nitrocellulose does. So basically every time you put on a new coat of this stuff, it's just blending with whatever coats you put on before that to form a good protective finish. I have trouble with words today. Words hard, English tough. So now we've got a couple of coats of tru-oil on this here neck, and it feels good. You can see it's good and satiny. It's not very shiny anymore. It's got a good protective coat going on it, but it does feel just a little bit rough the way your mother likes it. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take some of this 4/0 steel wool and go over it, and just again go with the grain of the wood a few times, smooth even motions to smooth it out a little bit. Now kids, do not do this unless this neck finish is absolutely dry. It has to be totally dry before you hit it with this steel wool. Reason being is because whenever you use this here steel wool, it's going to leave little tiny fragments of metal all over the place. It's very messy. I recommend you do this outside. It'll leave little metal shavings everywhere. So do it outside. But the problem is, and why I'm telling you to wait until the neck is totally bone dry before you do it, is because if you're not careful and your neck is still kind of tacky from the finish, and you steel wool it, you'll leave all these little tiny metal fibers behind, sitting in the finish in the maple or deep in the grain of the maple. And eventually that will rust and discolor and make your neck look like a big pile of shit. So make sure that this is totally bone dry, it's not tacky, it's not sticky whatsoever before you get your ass outside and go over it with this 4/0 steel wool in even smooth motions like this. It doesn't take much pressure or anything like that. Just go at it a little bit until it feels good and smooth like a baby's bottom, and then apply another couple of coats, wait for it to dry, steel wool it again, repeat as desired. And now for another coat of that grease. So I ended up with about 5 coats of tru-oil on this guy, and the neck is now feeling fantastic. The finish is totally dried, it's not tacky or sticky in any way at all. It's just a nice, smooth, silky feel. Feels fantastic. We're fixing to make it feel even better with the last step, which is applying the Birchwood Casey Gunstock wax. So first thing you're going to need to do is to remove the tape off of your fingerboard. So now that I've got the tape off, I can see a little bit of a line where the new finish is and where the old finish was, right on the edge of the fretboard right there where those fret tangs are, the ones that we taped over. Or if your neck has binding on it, you'll see a little line where gloss begins at the binding. So, what you're going to want to do now is to take your 4/0 steel wool, again, not 2/0 or anything like that, 4/0 steel wool, and just go across the edge of the fretboard, just like what I'm doing right here. Just going lengthwise on the edge of that board, just to knock down that little bit of gloss that's still remaining there. It's not enough of a difference where you'll notice, and that's such a small, what is that, like 3 millimeters or something like this? There's no way that you'll notice it while you're playing it. You won't really feel a ridge between the tru-oil and the old finish or anything like that. Just go over the edge of the board here with your steel wool, and that'll get rid of any gloss that's on there. Be sure to go over the other side of the fretboard as well, of course, knocking down any of that gloss that was left from the original finish, as well as cleaning off any tape gunk that managed to leave behind. So now that we've got that taken care of, we're going to start applying a couple of coats of the good old wax stuff. Be sure to shake it up really well. I've noticed over time it tends to kind of separate. You'll have liquidy stuff in the bottom and kind of a solid content at the top. So be sure to shake it very much like a Polaroid picture. Go ahead and get yourself a new clean piece of cloth to apply the wax with. Don't use the same one you did with the tru-oil. It'll probably have hard little dried up spots all over it by now. So this time go and cut up that shitty System of a Down tour t-shirt. It's been sitting in your closet for about a decade. So what we're going to do now is to put a little bit of that wax on a rag. Again, it doesn't really take that much. One bottle of this stuff is enough to do everything. And just start lightly buffing that into the back of the neck. Again, I'll kind of go with the grain. Then after I get a good coat on there, I'll start buffing it in circles. The wax isn't completely necessary, so if you just flat out can't afford to spend a couple bucks on a bottle, or maybe your local shop doesn't have any or something like that, it's not going to ruin this whole process. It's not going to wreck your neck finish or anything like that. It just adds a little bit of a nice, it kind of increases that non-stick feel on the back of the neck that I like so much, as well as provides a little bit of extra waterproofing, to keep your sweat and junk from soaking into the finish and all that. It'll just kind of waterproof it a little bit. Again, this stuff is made for guys out hunting and getting their rifle stocks all wet and stuff like this, so it'll do a good job of waterproofing it. So again, if you don't want to do the wax, you don't have to, but I enjoy the process of buffing it in. After I've started getting a good coat going on, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll take the rag and flip it over to the side that didn't have wax on it, or use a separate rag, whatever, and just start buffing that in, making circular motions, a vigorous circular motion like this right here. It's also worth mentioning that if you just absolutely can't find the Birchwood Casey stuff, this is another good product that you can probably find at Lowe's or Home Depot. It's called Howard Feed and Wax, and I started using this stuff a really long time ago to maintain the finish on my Warwick thumb bass. They recommend you use, a wax to put on that stuff. So I started using that a few years ago, and it works great. Comes in a pretty big bottle, obviously, so that's not a bad thing either. Now with the wax, one coat is fine. You can do more if you want to. If you just really enjoy this whole process and you never want it to end, you can just keep waxing and waxing and waxing, but I find usually 1 or 2 coats buffed in really well, and you're probably good to go. So I got that coat of wax all buffed into the neck here, and let me tell you, it feels fantastic. Really, really, really nice. I actually think I'm going to retract my statement that I made a second ago about the wax not being necessary. You're going to want the wax. It really did make this whole thing feel a lot smoother, just kind of enhance that non-stick feel. It is fantastic. Plus, I forgot to mention too, whenever you wax it, I guess just because of the content of the wax and stuff, it'll really bring out the grain even more. I'm noticing all kinds of little figures and stuff in here that I couldn't see before I put the wax on, so you're going to want that. This neck now feels faster than your slutty Aunt Julie. So now that we're all finished up, let me tell you about a little bit of care and maintenance you can do to keep your oil and wax finished neck looking and feeling just damn great. Taking care of one of these necks is no problem, and the good news is you've already got everything that you need in order to take care of it and make it last forever. Let's say you're one of those dudes who's like always down here in the cowboy cord range, and you start to just wear a hole through the neck, and you notice a spot that you need to refinish. Maybe it's become discolored or something like that. This never happens with me. I'm just putting out hypothetical scenarios to you, just in cases. The good thing about tru-oil is it blends into itself. So in other words, if you've already got something with a tru-oil finish and you put another coat on top of it, it's just going to soak in and blend in with what was already there. So if you ever feel like there's a spot on the neck, that's getting a little worn down or something like that, you can always just hit it with more tru-oil. Again, let it dry, steel wool it, wax it, yada yada yada, and you're totally donezo. I've had a couple very isolated instruments where I'll be playing one of these necks at a show, like a super long, super hot show, you know, where I'm sweating all over the neck and all this stuff. And then if I don't, you know, get to it within a couple of days or wipe it down, you know, I'll pick the guitar up after a few days and the neck will feel kind of hairy, kind of that raised grain feel, like we talked about when we were whistling the wood, raising the grain. And if that's the case, just hit it with that 4-aught steel wool. Just swipe it over a few times, it'll be good as new. If you want to make a date night of it, hit it with the steel wool, go over it with a coat of the wax, just to, again, kind of waterproof it and stuff. Wouldn't be a bad idea. But I really rarely ever do anything to mine at all. But before we start stripping off the finish for your guitar's neck, I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering what this kind of finish will look like after years of use. So I'd like to show you a few of my guitars with various neck finishes that I've done over the years and show you how they've held up. This right here is one of my all-time favorite guitars, my 1999 Ibanez RG7421 that I call the Duke. First swirl I ever did. Really love this guitar. Now again, I worked on this thing years and years ago before I started using tru-oil, and the finish on this neck is tung oil. Let's check it out. So you can see this guy has collected a little bit of funk over the years. It still feels great, it's very satiny and smooth, but it is discolored a little bit. Check out the difference between the back of the neck and the back of the headstock, which is definitely much cleaner and brighter looking than that is. Again, it feels fine, it doesn't affect performance whatsoever. Some guys are totally stuck on the aesthetics. This is yet another 1999 Ibanez, an RG7620 that I swirled years ago. And this is one of the first necks that I did a tru-oil finish on. Let's see how it's held up over the years of abuse. Keep in mind, this guitar, I've played thousands and thousands of hours on it. I've taken it on a couple different tours playing with Whitechapel, and Indywood and various other bands that I've played in, like Ark and stuff too. So this guitar has had the shit played out of it. So it'll be a good indicator of what your neck will look like with the tru-oil finish over years of use. So as you can see, this finish has held up extremely well, even after being played to death for years on end. Still looks very clean, hasn't really picked up any finger funk or anything like that. Looking good, still good and smooth and satiny on the back. But yeah, the tru-oil has definitely held up the best of any of those neck finishes that I've tried. Good stuff. It's also worth mentioning though that my personal sweat and oil composition seems to be pretty clean. The strings on my guitars last a really long time. I never really pit or corrode hardware on guitars and stuff like that. So my personal, brand of sweat apparently isn't all that corrosive. Your mileage may vary though if you're one of those people with, the good old piss hands where your strings sound good for about a day and then they're shot again and all the finish on your hardware on your guitar stays chewed up and rusty looking all the time. If that's the case, you might have a different experience. I can't comment because I've only used my own hands to play my guitar. So again, maybe if you're turbo greasy and all this stuff, maybe it'll discolor the finish. I really frankly don't know. So there you go, kids. Everything you need to know to turn the neck of your favorite guitar from a sticky, greasy mess into a clean, satiny machine, just like Uncle Ben's. This is the first guitar modification or kind of tech-related thing I've covered on This Is Why You Suck at Guitar. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Please leave me a comment letting me know what you guys would like to see me cover that's kind of in that same field. Stuff like changing strings, setting intonation, setting action, all that kind of stuff. Let me know whatever it is that you suck at, and I'll make a video telling you why you do. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at BenEllerGuitars. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Take it easy. Catch you next time.